Okay, to illustrate what I mean about the dynamic range and high contrast images, I'm going to use this image I took of a hotel in Italy when I was out there recently. As you can see, the camera's exposed for the sky, so that's looking pretty good with the sun rays coming through on the sunset, but the hotel and the grounds are actually quite dark. It's a typical example of what can happen when you're trying to shoot into the sun or trying to shoot a photograph that actually has very high and very low sections of contrast. Now, we can actually pull out the details from the hotel and the grounds, but if you're using a JPEG image, this would be very difficult to do because they don't hold nearly as much information as a RAW. So I always advise people to shoot RAW, whatever you do, and if you haven't done it already, just learn how to use it, like I am with this photograph. Now, the image is loaded into Digital Photo Professional DPP from Canon, which is the software you get with the camera. So I'm just going to bring up the tool palette to work with. Now, what I'm actually going to do is produce two photos from this, one where the sky is perfectly exposed and one where the foreground is perfectly exposed. What I will then do is simply overlap the images and rub away one of the backgrounds to reveal both halves to create one good image. So I'll work on the sky first, and as the camera is actually exposed for the sky, there's not really a lot to do. What I will do is, first of all, is change it to faithful, so I get a bit more information in the sky. You can see the change straight away from standard, where it's a bit overexposed, to faithful, where you get a bit more definition. I'll try and find a decent white balance to go with the sky. I don't mind if it's a bit dull at first, because I can always bring out the colours in Photoshop later. That for me will do at the moment. Then we'll just work a bit on the tone curves. Add a bit of colour with saturation, a bit of sharpness. Okay, that'll do for me for the sky, so what I'm going to do is save that now. Okay, we go to File, Convert and Save, and we'll call this number 1 and save. Now I'm going to reset all the adjustments that I've made back to how they were before, because we're now going to work on the foreground. So we're now back to where we started. So forgetting what the sky looks like, we're now going to work on the foreground. So if we increase the brightness, you can see it immediately, you get a much better looking image. And again, we'll go to faithful and find a good white balance. Okay, that'll do for now. And then we go to the tone curves, just add a bit of contrast in there, a bit of sharpness and a bit of saturation. For me, that looks fine. It's something I'm going to work on a bit more in Photoshop once the two images are spliced together. But for now, we've already got the sky. Now we need to save this file for the foreground. So we go to File, Convert and Save, and we'll call this one number 2. So that's the two images saved. We now need to go into Photoshop and open both images up. So we'll hop over there, open image number 1, which is the good sky, and open number 2, which is the good foreground. Now we're just going to use the selection tool to drag one or other onto the other image to create a two-layered photo. So if I just bring the hotel foreground onto the sky image there, I don't need this one anymore, so we can close that. What I've now got is a two-layered image with the dark image behind this one. So what I need to do is actually lose this sky and reveal the good sky below. To do that, I'm going to use the eraser tool, nice and simple. Select a decent sized brush, get the opacity and flow up to 100%, and then just start to erase away the old bright sky to leave the new one below. Now I'll just do most of it at this point, just to get rid of that. Now bear in mind I'm doing this quite quickly for the purpose of the tutorial, but you can obviously go into a lot more detail when doing it for yourself. So I'll do it that far, and then we'll reduce the size of the brush to go in a bit more detail below, and also reduce the opacity and flow a little bit so I can actually work on it slower. So if we zoom in a bit and just work on these bits here, we'll actually do the whole of the background. Now some of the trees will go black here around the edges, but I'm not too worried about that for now. Like I said, this is just for the tutorial. If I just reduce that, okay, let's get rid of most of this. We'll leave the fine edges of the trees till the very last. So if we just work on all this right around the edges. Now I'm actually going to pause the video while I do the rest, because it could take some time and it uses up video space, so I'll see you in a minute. Okay, you can see I've removed most of the old sky to reveal the new one below, just leaving this white band here. So what I'm going to do now is reduce the brush size even more and go in and do it fine detail. This seems to be quite long-winded, but actually when you get used to it, when you get used to the technique, it actually doesn't take long at all. So I'm now going to go into more detail and get rid of this, and then we'll show you the final image. Okay, we're now a lot closer into the trees, so the last stage, or for the last stage, I'm going to reduce the opacity right down and the flow right down, increase the brush slightly with a feathered brush, and then we're just going to slowly work away at these, just to blend it in with the foreground and the background, just for these last little bits. Now the trees and bushes will go a little bit darker, but you should be able to blend it quite nicely if you do it correct. As you can see, it's blending there. I'm doing this a lot quicker than I would normally, just again for the purposes of the tutorial. Just increase this slightly. There we go. Now these trees are fairly silhouetted anyway, so I'm not too fussed if they do go a bit dark. We can always adjust that. There we go. Okay, just get these last bits up here, up the top. Okay, let's just get this a bit darker so it blends in. Okay, so now we've blended the two images, and I need to flatten them into one JPEG so I can work on the rest of the colour saturation and shadows and everything. So layer, flatten image, it's already done. So now we just save this image as a single JPEG, and we'll call it number 3. And save it at high resolution, and that's done. So now we can work on the image as we would normally. So first of all, what I'm going to do is straighten the image. So bring up the grid and the running ants, and Control T to transform, and I'm actually just going to swivel this round so the hilltail's nice and straight. Click there, remove the grid, and then just crop these bits away where it's taken the edges. So we're now left with a straight image that we can work on. So first thing I'm going to do is go to Shadow Highlights and just very slightly bring up the foreground detail there. And I'm going to quickly adjust the colour saturation a little bit, just to lose a little bit of the colour cast. That's okay, and then I'm going to saturate it back to bring up the colours of the highlight in the gardens, and use the saturation tool just to enhance it a little bit more. And what I'm also going to do is just blend this a little bit more using the low light tool, just so it looks a bit more natural. Okay, so I'm reasonably happy with that. Like I said, I would spend more time on it if I was doing it properly for stock, which I will do later on, but for the purpose of this tutorial I just wanted to show you how it can be done. Now you may think it's a bit long-winded to do it this way, but sometimes it's just necessary to do so, and if you want to sell stock photography or get yourself known for going slightly that bit further, then sometimes you need to do a little bit more work on a photo to get it looking right. So if I save this now as number 3, just overwrite the old one, we've now got the final photo, and I'll show you the difference between the original and the new image. If I go back to DPP and reset all the settings like that, you can now see the original photo that we worked from against the new image. It's quite a stark difference, but with a little bit of work you can actually get the image looking quite good.